I'll give you some kind of update on where Dave White and I, and now Rona Sharp and Greg Benfield and their team at Oxford Brookes are up to with the Digital Student Project. Can I just find out, from a show of hands, how many people in the room have heard, either at the October Experts meeting or elsewhere, have heard one of us talking about the Digital Student Project already? Oh, right. Okay. Well, I will give the kind of overview very briefly then, because most of you, I guess, will have some idea about it. So the phase 1 study, which was an HE study, which was focused on university, that Dave White and I carried out, we were asked to sort of review the existing evidence about students' expectations and experiences of the digital environment at university. And we took that in quite a broad sense, really. We did a desk study, and we were lucky enough to get hold of quite a lot of institutional data, which we also reviewed. We did a survey and a number of focus groups. The phase we're in at the moment, which this is part of, is a kind of consultation phase where we are, as Sarah indicated, kind of trolling around the country with these various findings and challenges and asking people what they think of them. But at the same time, there is more work being done by Dave White looking at late school leavers, looking at school leavers as kind of late stage school students, and by Rona's team looking at FE and skills. So there'll be a bit of an update on those two as we go through today, this session. Findings about students' kind of incoming expectations, as I'm sure you'll remember from hearing Dave and I talk about this, were not hugely surprising. You know, if I could pick out two sort of maybe important and slightly surprising messages, although I guess it won't be that new to people here. Although students are very keen to bring and build their own environments, to bring their own devices and services, it doesn't mean that they don't also want fixed provision, hardware, printers, licensed software to be available to them in a place they identify as a place of study, specially set aside for that. And we can say a bit more about why that might be, but it's certainly not the case that Bring Your Own is creating an environment where students expect not to have things provided for them by way of hardware and software in an institutional setting. And although some students certainly expect the institution, the university, to be a place where they will develop their skills, actually that's not universally true. I think probably more students I've spoken to have said, hang on a minute, aren't we supposed to be able to do that before we come? And I don't want to be in a group of students who don't know how to do the basics, than have said that should be laid on. So in a sense, students are less forgiving of the digital divide, or the students that are on the right side of it are less forgiving of the digital divide than we might want them to be. Now, that doesn't mean we should necessarily pander to that, but it does mean that the expectation for a large number of students is that skills support will be on a drop-in basis, on a access myself basis, lynda.com or some such thing. And there's an active impatience with large amounts of time set aside to do things that they perceive as remedial or unnecessary to them. If we were to look at the limits of that expectation story, though, I think it's quite clear that it comes fairly low down in the development pyramid that Rona and I developed several years ago and have been talking about. So right at the bottom is the expectation of universal, ubiquitous, robust, reliable access to Wi-Fi. And in fact, students don't think they can do anything without Wi-Fi. They can't feel at home, they can't find out where to eat, they don't know where they're going to meet. You know, they don't feel, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they don't feel any security, safety, or kind of nurture at all if Wi-Fi doesn't work. So it's an absolute basic, it's kind of down there at the bottom. And when it comes to kind of the basics of access to networks and devices and services, absolutely, their expectations about that kind of access level tend, I think, to come from places outside of university. So their experience with other kinds of online services, their experiences from school and at home will lead them to expect that access will be kind of solved for them. It will be a problem solved and a tick in the box. And similarly, when it comes to skills, they kind of expect that there will be an environment in which basic skills are supported if they need that support, and people will know how to use the technology, how to make it work, and how to help them make it work. But as soon as you kind of go a little bit further up into actually what sort of practices will help me to be successful at university with my digital technology, what are the subject and professional specific uses of technology that I will be aware of, how will I use my skills in an academic or professional context, and particularly those ideas about who will I be, what will my digital identity be when I have completed my university experience, then students' expectations are incredibly vague. And so what that means is they are ours to shape in a way. So all that stuff kind of above that fuzzy line is beyond incoming students' expectations. It's not visible to them. And in a way, why should it be? Because if we want university to be a transformational and uniquely higher learning experience, and the same would be true of college, then how would we, it wouldn't be useful to students to know exactly what they thought that experience was going to look like. So when you go up into that sort of higher area of students' actual experiences once they arrive and how their expectations are gradually framed and shaped, then they're much more varied, they're much more contextualised by the subject area or the particular aspiration that students have. They're not necessarily what students were expecting. And indeed, if you ask students about what's been transformational for them in terms of their digital experience, the things they talk about, which are usually things like access to e-journals, sort of high-level specialist study resources, things like academic practices of reference managing, research practices, data analysis using specialist software, practices of design, whether that's graphic design or computer-aided design, and project management and kind of professional practices. These critical moments with technology tend to be things that they have had to be formally taught, because the practices are complex and the systems that support them are complex. They're not the frictionless adoption of an app in your hand. They are things that have to take application and formal instruction and kind of time set aside and fenced about in the curriculum. But if you think about students' kind of study habits with technology, perhaps they're more informal study habits, then those are usually a hybrid of perhaps the informal practices they have, often looking at their peers, looking over their peers' shoulders, seeing what other people are doing, along with the fact that they're doing that in an academic context with academic criteria of judgment. And that kind of hybrid nature, I suppose, of students' digital practices in an academic setting is what makes student partnerships so powerful, because there are areas where students are bringing new practices, designing animations, for example, using mapping tools, things I see students doing that to me are actually quite advanced, which are just absolutely part of the kind of native use of the technology. They have that capacity, which combined with our academic context and criteria of excellence can be really powerful. So the value of those kind of critical moments is often only perceived at the end of a course or once students are well embedded in a course looking back. It's not something that you're going to glean from students by interviewing them on the way in or surveying them on the way in and asking them what they expect. But all the way through that journey, I think we've found two things. One, we know teaching staff skills are very important, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they can make the sound work, actually, as long as they're prepared to ask for help, as I was, but it does mean that they're able to communicate ideas. And for students, communicating ideas means using the available technology when that's appropriate and useful. So teachers can communicate ideas, and students' digital identity continues to be a key reason for engaging in skills-based work, a key reason for producing digital outcomes. And also, of course, if we allow that to happen, it is then a key outcome that they can take forward, as well as their degree classification, their higher education achievement record. If they can take forward some sort of portfolio that has left, that is a digital footprint of what they've done, then for them that is meeting their needs absolutely for employability and for transition and progression. So, as we may have said when we came to talk about this before, there is a kind of distinction to be made between transactional uses of technology and transformational. And the transactional would, for me, be the kind of, I think sometimes it's called hygiene by IT managers and such like, but it's those kind of basic resources and access to those resources that students might expect from any kind of digital environment they're in. So it's networks, it's hardware and software, it's also accessing sort of basic information about my course, information about my institution, and to some extent now personal information, so my timetable, my grades, where I'm meant to be, who I'm meant to be doing it with. Those kind of transactional bits of information will be instantly available and on a device of my choosing. Booking appointments, submitting work, receiving grades. You know, I'm saying that as though it's already easy to organise. Of course it's not. But those are expectations that students definitely have, those that are transactional. And those expectations they arrive with, and they're largely established by their transactions with other digital service providers in the world outside of university. When it comes to transformational uses of technology, things that they will uniquely do in a university setting that they would not necessarily experience anywhere else. Things like using digital technology to share ideas, to build collaborative products, to have professional or academic dialogue, to maybe encounter challenging and difficult concepts and overcome them, to produce new digital artefacts, creative or professional, and so on. And those, what I've included on that side is those kind of critical moments that students mention. Those expectations are not fixed and are there on arrival. They're established during their studies in dialogue with their tutors and peers. Of course, that doesn't mean that students won't go about comparing the experiences they're having across courses and saying, well, you know, actually, why do you have that when we have this? And one of the things that's important that we've talked to students about, just in the last few days I've been doing quite a lot of student focus groups, students actually do understand that subject areas are different, and it's not the case that if you're studying graphical design you expect to have the same technologies, the same experiences as if you're studying engineering, for example. But sometimes we maybe need to make that a little bit more explicit, that the technological experience students have is not a baseline experience. It is an advanced and enhanced and transformational experience, and therefore it's relevant to their aspirations. It's not necessarily relevant to the aspirations of the students that that lives down the corridor with them in hall. That was a kind of brief update on where we kind of had got to before we began the consultation. I think because Paul's talking in a bit about what students really want, I'll go quite briefly over the work we did with students to kind of visualise the kind of digital environment that would be truly transformational for them. You can sort of come back maybe and look through that. But I think I went back just a couple of days ago and looked back through some of that work, which we now did several months ago. And the last 2 points on here are things that I put back into the slide about that, because having gone through the consultation process, suddenly some ideas from students that looked quite outlying and odd suddenly sprang out at me, and I thought, well, actually, maybe we need to put some of those outlying ideas back in. So the second to last point is about hybrid services, and I put and contested. So this idea that actually, although students love e-journals, there is a growing awareness that there are more contested and grey area literatures out there, and open literatures and open data that may not be published in the most obvious formal ways but still might be valuable in a professional or academic context. There are collations of content that may not be authorised by a university but still have great validity and interest and excitement for university students. So, you know, it may be that we're moving into a kind of hybrid services environment which students need to be aware does include kind of resources that are not necessarily hugely visible through the official channels but will still be useful to them in their study, and that integrating those resources might be a part of what they're learning to do. And I think the other thing that students were unclear about, which we're unclear about, is which way the landscape is going. So are we moving into a world where there's going to be kind of micro-licensing and micro-payment for everything that might be of value to me? Or are we moving into a world where actually the landscape's going to be wide open, and I can continue to expect, as students do, that lots of valuable content will be free and will be easily available? Are we moving into a lax or a kind of hyper-secure digital environment? Questions we haven't answered yet, but I think it was quite interesting for me that when you kind of looked at the vibrations at the edges rather than the mainstream messages, students were beginning to wonder about what that was going to look like for them. So having done more work with students, actually is, you know, it's parallel to the digital student study but ongoing, and as part of the consultation we've had students in all of the sessions we've done, which has been exciting and challenging. What are the key issues we might begin to pull out? I think a lot of this is about the changing nature of students' affiliation to their institution, some of which students are bringing themselves, perhaps from other discourses about, for example, value for money and what they're investing and what their parents are investing in their going to university. Some of which may simply be the fact that universities are changing and becoming more borderless. The place of the university is less obviously, in many cases, identified with one campus. You know, the university might actually be saying to students, we have students in other countries who are equally valuable and part of our community as you are. It may be part of the nature of relationships to all kinds of organisations, employers becoming more fluid and more short-term in nature. So students are kind of at a cusp with that, And there are also many of them also at a cusp in their personal lives and kind of maturity, if you like, where on the one hand they want a lot of affiliation and security and a sense of belonging, and on the other hand they know that a more open, porous, challenging environment is where they need to get to. So ways that manifest in the digital environment, for example, around what I would call branding versus blending. To what extent do the services we offer students blend so seamlessly with their own personal choice of services, with their own kind of personal apps and devices, that they don't actually know when they're using things that are provided by the university? It's a big issue for libraries. You know, library staff, and they find staff as well. You know, library staff will do surveys at which students say, I never went to the library, I just used Google. Well, yes, but you use Google on campus. You are, because we've kind of made this so seamless for you, you are accessing scholarly resources that are only available to you because of how you're using Google and where you're using Google, but is that actually visible to students? So there are sort of thresholds between branding and blending that students aren't necessarily aware of. And I think universities are beginning to wake up to the fact that there needs to be a place where the services provided by the institution are very clearly branded. The student dashboard becomes very clearly branded, so students know in the digital space where they are. They know that they are in a university space and in some ways being held and supported and given resources that are simply not available to them through other means. So it's getting that branding and blending kind of right. So students are affiliated but also familiar with what they're using. The other thing that has come out really strongly is that students are very attached to spaces and places, and that goes back to the point I made about fixed computing. You know, why would students want to go and sit in a computer lab when there are these wonderful social spaces with coffee available that they could go and do their learning with their laptop and their device? Well, some of that's just practical. Their laptops and devices might not be as good as we think they are. They may not feel confident to use laptops and devices for academic work unless there's somebody around who might give them support, which they would find in a computer lab where there are other students. But some of that just seems to be a social issue, that students actually like going to a place where they have everything that they know they need to do their university work. And it's defined in that way. It might be a great place to collaborate with other students because we know we've all got the same thing and it's here we can see it. So those spaces and places, it's a complicated one. Students don't necessarily want to be getting their wings and flying free straight away. They want spaces that are designated and fixed in a way and identified very closely with the kind of work the institution expects them to do. And that ties in with other doubts and nervousnesses that students have about the open landscape. We can go in very gung-ho and say, we want you to be creating an open, public, digital footprint from the moment you arrive with us. I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do. But what students will turn around and say, and have said to me, is, well, hang on, I know that's where I need to get to, but is this not a place that I can try new identities safely and fail and not leave traces on the internet that will haunt me for the rest of my life? Do you not have a duty to provide me with a walled garden where I can experiment, perhaps with windows out onto this wider landscape, but where I can experiment and fail and try and move progressively into places where what I do in my university work is public and visible and other people can comment on it. So it's important that the digital environment at university gives students both of those things. It gives them those windows on the wider world, that sense of that we're a porous institution. What happens in the classroom has to, is just one part of what you're expected to find out and to learn and to do. But it is safe, and the digital space is safe in ways that the open landscape isn't. And in a totally related way, there's a tension between I'm here, I'm paying, I'm investing my time, you give me what I need to succeed. Everything I need to succeed, you must give to me. And actually, when I relax into that and I feel that I'm supported, what I want to do, as students like Matt have wanted to do, is to build my own, is to bring and build my own. So I really actually then want to go beyond what you're giving me to succeed and to create my own personal environment for learning. But again, it's only when students feel they've got that security that they are being provided for that they will feel safe enough to go and innovate and create new blends, new kind of digital environments themselves. I'm going to hand over to Rona in just a sec. But I want to say briefly something about what Dave White has been doing. He's not here, unfortunately. That's me pretending to be Dave in the corner. To look a little bit in more detail at the expectations created by school, because we identified from the end of phase 1 that there wasn't enough evidence really to draw strong conclusions about how school students were, how the expectations set by school were changing, and going into college as well as into university. That's true. Sarah and I went up to Scotland. Was it last week? It's starting to be a blur. Where were we? 2 weeks ago. We were in Scotland, and the curriculum for excellence in schools in Scotland is already manifestly creating new expectations that school students bring through to university about the kind of learning that they will undertake, that it will be flexible, that it will be digitally supported, and so on. English schools where this work's been done, there's a lot more variety. So this has been building on phase 1 and doing some interviews and looking at some results of some focus groups. And certainly in England, practice seems to vary very, very widely, both within the same school and between schools. But what Dave was pulling out was that it seems to be predominantly a face-to-face and didactic practice with technology. So again, going back to that top of the pyramid, the ways in which students will be learning at university are not with technology are not necessarily something that they expect, even if their school has been very digitally forward-thinking. There are VLEs in schools, of course we know that, and they tend to be used exclusively for distributing content, learning materials. Might not be so different, we might say, from some universities, but certainly the aspiration is that those kind of environments will be used more for discussion and dialogue as well. And this is a Dave expression, but he's seeing technology being used within pre-digital paradigms, so simply to replicate the way that school teaching and learning has happened, and that the experience that students are having, which is richer, is happening at home. So I'm going to hand over to Rona to say a little bit about the FE and skills study, and then maybe we could take questions together rather than separately.